Hey guys, this video is brought to you by one of my sponsors, TigerStream. They believe in what we're doing here on this channel, and they offer you guys an exceptional product, and the people are incredible to deal with. You will completely eliminate your cable bill, and you will not be disappointed. There's a 75% off promo code in the description below. And I also want to take a second to thank everybody who supported this channel through Patreon. If you want to support the channel with $1 or $2 a month, the Patreon link is also in the description below. Here's the video.
If you think for 1 second that we lobbed $100 million worth of ammunition into Syria because we have a benevolent government who loves and cares about dead or suffering children in foreign lands, then you weren't listening to or haven't heard then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright as she told the public that U.S. foreign intervention, which directly cost the lives of over 500,000 children, was worth it.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
You're clueless about or just don't want to remember the 1993 attack by the federal government on the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, that resulted in the killing of 76 people, including children. But most of all, you're clueless about the history of this propped up mixture of cloth and paper in your pocket called the Federal Reserve Note. Why the hell is this thing worth anything? First, you need to know that in reality, it's not just a Federal Reserve Note. It's not just a dollar, it's a petrodollar. So here's a short history lesson you really need to know. In 1944, a war-weary world convened in the Bretton Woods Conference. 44 allied nations from across the globe met to discuss the future of the new economic world. From this meeting came an arrangement to establish the US dollar, which was then the strongest currency, as the global currency, which would also be backed by gold. You can kind of think of it as an insurance policy for the financially ruined nations at the time. From the Bretton Woods Conference also came what would eventually evolve into the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. All is right with the world for a few years, but then the 1960s hit. The US gold-backed monetary system begins to cripple the American economy. The pegged fixed rate of dollar to gold first created a false demand for the US dollar, which eventually could no longer be backed in gold. Countries grew suspicious. Then we got involved in the Vietnam War, and our deficit was realized by the world in late 1971. That deficit being about $200 billion. Countries began asking for their gold, but the US simply no longer had it. What was once a nation that held 80% of the world's gold now had almost none. So the president at that time had to act, and act quickly. So the United States makes history again in 1971. On August 15, 1971, the U.S. president at that time, Richard Nixon, delivers a speech to the world.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
There would no longer be a gold-backed U.S. currency. World currencies now floated on the market, ending the Bretton Woods Agreement. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, assists in the deal breaker. In 1973, to maintain a demand on a global scale for the US dollar, similar to that of the Woods Agreement, a deal is struck with Saudi Arabia. Oil for dollars became the new world economy. The petrodollar system is born. The petrodollar deal between Saudi Arabia and the United States is this. It takes special note of this because it's the basis of today's American foreign policy in the Middle East. For every barrel of oil purchased from Saudi Arabia, from any nation, the oil would have to be purchased in US dollars only. For those who have foreign currency, they would first have to convert to US dollars, before being able to purchase the oil. Every growing economy operates on oil, so they needed US dollars. But the exchange for such a lucrative deal comes at a cost that we still pay for. For Saudi Arabia to agree to the exclusive oil for dollars deal, the US promised weapons and military protection. For excess profits made from oil, Saudi Arabia would buy US debt. And that's what you have in your pocket. That Federal Reserve note is a note of debt. So in short, the United States was to protect Saudi borders, which is oil, at all costs necessary. Now for some kickers. In 1975, OPEC arrives. Multiple nations agree on the oil for dollars deal with similar U.S. military and weapons protection exchanges. But some years after the arrangement, several nations begin to question the validity of such a deal, much like what happened with the gold for dollars deal of Bretton Woods. Nations like North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Venezuela decide to exit or not take part in the deal. This is also during a time when Russia, China, and India turned their backs on the petrodollar system. Iran's sanctions commenced in 1979. Remember Syria? They made it to a similar list in 1979 by that same US department. Terms are coined like axis of evil, a corporate mainstream media favorite. In 1980, the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force, or RDJTF, is established, mainly to deter Russia and maintain Gulf region oil stability. In 1983, the RDJTF turns into the United States Central Command, or CENTCOM. Their responsibility, Middle East and Central Asian regions. Then comes Saddam Hussein, 9/11, and the War on Terror. In 1991, the U.S. air-ground war in Iraq begins, also known as the Gulf War. April 2000, the U.S. builds a $1 billion base in Qatar in the event of action against Iraq. But this barely rates a mention in fake stream media. In September 24th, 2000, and this is important to note, guys, Saddam Hussein announces Iraq oil exports would be exchanged for the euro, not the US dollar. The petro-euro plans are in place, and Hussein thumbs his nose at American Saudi oil deals. Now remember, that was almost exactly 1 year before the 9/11 attacks. In March of 2001, the Pentagon documents how Iraq oil fields would be carved up and outsourced to Western companies. Then comes September 2001, the 9/11 terrorist attack. Already, not everyone is convinced this is so straightforward, but the mainstream media churns into action, quickly pointing fingers at Afghanistan and Iraq. But most of the attackers were already known to be Saudi. Bush ignores Saudi ties to the attacks and instead hunts for reasons to invade Iraq and continually presses the CIA for a link. Then they link Iraq's Hussein to bin Laden, but with no credible sources. Mainstream media perpetuates the Bush administration line that Hussein is guilty of the attacks by association. The U.S. must war with Iraq and Afghanistan. The war on terror commences in the name of freedom and democracy. And what you need to keep in mind is that oil buys America a lot of cheap deals. It props up the U.S. economy, and it's an excuse to print dollars to supply to those who want to buy oil. And what the United States government doesn't want citizens knowing is that in 2002, the petrodollar is dumped. Saddam Hussein's petro-euro is now in full swing. Almost. This essentially means that if Europe were to jump on board, the 1973 US-Saudi deal would be on shaky grounds. By March 2003, Bush announces war with Iraq after much media hype, and by June of 2003, Iraq's oil is suddenly trading under the petrodollar again. So what does this all mean? The rundown I just gave you is far from exhaustive and has taken weeks to compile. And it's the government's intention to make this complex. The words petrodollar system tends to make one's eyes glaze over, but if you're interested at all in the current international climate from Russia to Israel to China to Iran, Syria, the Middle East, or even North Korea, you need to inform yourself about the petrodollar. If the petrodollar failed tomorrow, the United States economy would most likely collapse. And hyperinflation would roll through this country like an unstoppable storm. Those who don't deal in US dollars have a good chance of economic survival, but superpowers would change and the world would be a different place. The United States would lose their global standing. It's the ultimate textbook fall of an empire.
Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. He pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. We can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. The purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments. It's not to sort of deter conflict. We're going to invade countries, and my mind was spinning. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. And that's why we're failing in Iraq, because Iran and Syria know about the plan.
So let me go back to what I said at the beginning of this video. If you think for 1 second that we lobbed $100 million worth of ammunition into Syria because we have a benevolent government who loves and cares about dead or suffering children in foreign lands, you need to take that dollar out of your pocket and realize that your entire way of life is about to change. This video was made possible by all these incredible people who believe in what we're doing here on this channel and support the content through Patreon. If you're new to my channel, hit the subscribe and notification button. If you want to support the channel, hit me up on Patreon, get a hard-hitting conversation-starting shirt, or visit one of my sponsors. The links are in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video.